The shallow grave wasn't dug with reverence. It was a hateful, hurried thing, a mere scrape in the cold, unforgiving earth of the Oregon woods. When Abigail Thorne stumbled upon it, she saw not a burial site, but an act of profound cruelty. A single dark-skinned hand, fingers curled as if grasping for one last breath, clawed through the loose soil. Every instinct screamed for her to flee, to ride back to the lonely safety of her homestead. But a deeper, more stubborn part of her, the part that had survived widowhood and isolation, refused to turn away. She began to dig. She had no idea that in saving the life of this stranger, a Modoc man left for dead, she would unearth a truth that would shatter the memory of the husband she mourned and ignite a fire that could consume them all. The autumn of 1875 painted the Cascade foothills in strokes of melancholy golden rust. For Abigail Thorne, the beauty was a quiet torment. It was the second autumn since her husband Robert had been killed, and the vibrant death of the leaves only reminded her of her own stagnant grief. Her life was a metronome of survival. Mend the fence, check the snares, chop the wood, sit by the fire, and stare into the flames, remembering a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. Her ranch was a lonely outpost of civilization pressed against the vast untamed wilderness that stretched towards the California borderlands, a place still raw with the memory of the Modoc War just 2 years prior. The air was thick with mistrust. Settlers saw shadows behind every tree, and the remaining Modoc, scattered and hunted, saw only broken promises and bayonets. On this particular Tuesday, a biting wind whipped down from the peaks, carrying the scent of pine and impending snow. Abigail was tracking a deer, her Winchester rifle resting comfortably in the crook of her arm. Robert had taught her to shoot, to track, to read the land. "You have to be as tough as the territory, Abby," he'd said, his voice full of the boundless confidence she'd once found so intoxicating. Now it was a hollow echo. She was moving through a dense copse of ponderosa pines when she saw it. The disturbed earth. It was wrong. Not the work of a foraging bear or a burrowing badger. This was the clumsy, rectangular outline of a human grave, and it was fresh. Fear, cold and sharp, pricked her skin. This was Indian country, or had been. It was also land that greedy men like Bartholomew Corrigan, whose sprawling cattle empire bordered her small property, were always trying to seize. Violence was a constant, simmering threat. Her first thought was of the circuit judge found robbed and murdered on the Klamath Trail last spring. She approached cautiously, her rifle held ready. The wind soughed through the pines, a mournful whispering sound, and then she saw the hand. It was dark, sinewy, and caked with dirt. It protruded from the soil, fingers clenched tight. For a heart-stopping moment, she thought it was a corpse's final, grisly salute. She took a step back, her breath catching in her throat. But as she watched, a tremor ran through the fingers. They uncurled slightly, then tightened again. A desperate, silent plea. He was alive. Every rational part of her mind screamed at her. Run! This was not her business. Whoever was buried here had powerful enemies. Enemies who had left him for dead and would surely not appreciate a witness. It was likely a Modoc warrior. And the local sentiment, fanned by men like Corrigan, was that the only good Modoc was a dead one. Bringing one to her ranch was an invitation for disaster. The sheriff in Linkville, a tired man named Brody, was little help. He was more adept at paperwork than peacekeeping. But Abigail looked at that struggling hand, and she didn't see a Modoc or a settler. She saw a human being suffocating in the dark. She saw the same brutal finality that had taken Robert from her, the same cold indifference of the wilderness. Something inside her, a core of defiance that had kept her from selling the ranch and fleeing back east, took hold. Dropping to her knees, she discarded her rifle and began to dig with her bare hands. The soil was cold and packed, a mixture of dirt, pine needles, and stones that scraped her skin raw. She clawed at the earth, her breath coming in ragged gasps, half from exertion, half from terror. What if his attackers were still nearby, watching? She uncovered a shoulder, then a face. He was turned on his side, his cheek pressed into the dirt. A brutal gash ran across his forehead, sticky with blood and soil. His hair was long and black, unbound. His features were strong, sharp cheekbones and a proud jaw, even slack as they were. He wore buckskin trousers and no shirt, his torso a canvas of old scars and fresh bruises. A length of rope was still looped loosely around his neck. They hadn't even done him the courtesy of strangling him first. They had buried him alive, leaving him to the slow, terrifying embrace of the earth. He was unconscious, his breathing shallow and erratic. Abigail worked frantically, her mind a maelstrom of fear and resolve. She finally cleared enough earth to pull him free. He was a tall man, heavy with muscle, and it took all her strength to drag him from the pit. He lay still on the pine needles, a man literally pulled back from the underworld. She checked his pulse. It was a faint, thready flutter. He was alive, but barely. She couldn't leave him here. His attackers would surely return to ensure their work was done. Taking him to town was a death sentence of a different kind. The Linkville doctor was Corrigan's cousin and a known Indian hater. There was only one option, the most dangerous and foolish one imaginable. She had to take him home. Retrieving her horse, she managed with superhuman effort to haul the unconscious man onto the saddle, slinging him over it like a sack of grain. It was a clumsy, undignified rescue, but it was a rescue nonetheless. Every creak of the saddle leather, every snap of a twig on the trail back to her cabin sounded like a gunshot in the tense silence. She scanned the trees, her heart hammering against her ribs, expecting to see the glint of a rifle barrel at any moment. But the woods remained silent, watching. She reached the small, sturdy cabin Robert had built, and half dragged, half carried the man inside, laying him on the cot she kept by the hearth. As she barred the door, the full weight of what she had done crashed down on her. On the floor of her home, a place of sanctuary and grief, lay a near-dead Modoc man, a fugitive from someone's justice or someone's vengeance. She had dug up more than a man. She had dug up a secret, and she knew with a certainty that chilled her to the bone that her quiet, lonely life was over. The man lay on the cot for 3 days, a specter hovering between the world of the living and the dead. Abigail became his unwilling, terrified guardian. She cleaned the gash on his forehead, stitching it closed with a neatness born of mending countless pieces of farm equipment and clothing. The needle and thread, usually for darning Robert's old shirts, now sealed the flesh of a stranger. She washed the dirt from his body, her movements clinical and detached. She discovered the markings of a warrior, faded scars from blades and perhaps bullets, and newer, angrier bruises that mottled his chest and back. He was strong. His body was a testament to a life of hardship and conflict. Who was he? A chief, a renegade, just a man in the wrong place at the wrong time? He was consumed by a fever that left him shivering and muttering in a language she didn't understand. The words were guttural, rhythmic, sometimes rising to a desperate cry before falling back into a murmur. In those moments, Abigail would freeze, her hand on the old pistol she now kept tucked in her apron, wondering if she was nursing a viper back to health. She fed him broth, spooning it carefully past his cracked lips. She kept the fire roaring, fighting the chill that seemed to emanate from his still form. The cabin, once her sanctuary, now felt like a prison. Every knock of a branch against the window was the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Every gust of wind was the whisper of his enemies. On the 4th day, the fever broke. Abigail woke to find him watching her. His eyes were dark, intelligent, and utterly unreadable. They held no gratitude, only a deep, bottomless well of caution. He didn't speak. He simply watched her as she moved about the cabin, his gaze following her every move. The silence was heavier, more unnerving than his delirious ramblings had been. "You're awake," she said, her voice sounding unnaturally loud. She held out a cup of water. "Drink this." He pushed himself up slowly, his muscles protesting. He took the cup, his eyes never leaving hers, and drank. He was still weak, but the core of his strength was returning. He was like a cornered wolf, wounded but no less dangerous for it. "Who are you?" she asked, keeping a respectable distance. He just stared, his expression a mask of stone. "Who did this to you?" Silence. Frustration mingled with her fear. "I saved your life. I pulled you out of the ground. I could be shot for having you here. The least you can do is tell me your name." He looked away from her, then, his gaze drifting to the rifle mounted over the fireplace. Robert's rifle. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He remained silent. 2 days later, a rider approached the cabin. Abigail's heart leaped into her throat. She motioned frantically for the man to get down, to hide. He slid off the cot and moved with a surprising swiftness for someone so recently near death, concealing himself in the dark corner behind a stack of firewood. Abigail smoothed her apron, took a deep breath, and opened the door. It was Bartholomew Corrigan. He sat astride a magnificent black stallion, looking down at her with an air of proprietary benevolence that always set her teeth on edge. Corrigan was a handsome man in his late 40s, with silvering temples and eyes the color of a winter sky. He owned half the county and behaved as if he owned the other half, too. He had made no secret of his desire to buy Abigail's land, which contained the only year-round spring in the area. "Mrs. Thorne," he boomed, his voice a little too friendly. "A fine, crisp morning." He dismounted, his expensive leather boots sinking into the mud. "Mr. Corrigan," Abigail replied coolly. "What brings you out to my corner of the world?" "Just checking my fences and my neighbors," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Making sure everyone is safe. There have been reports, some Modoc bucks, stragglers from the war, causing trouble up near the lake. We're forming a posse to sweep the area. Can't be too careful." His eyes swept past her, peering into the dim interior of the cabin. "You're all alone out here, Abigail. It's not safe. I've told you, my offer for this plot still stands. A generous offer. I'm not selling, Mr. Corrigan. Robert built this place for us. It's my home." Corrigan's smile tightened. "Robert was a good man, a tragic loss, killed by savages. That's why we have to be so vigilant. If you see or hear anything, a stranger, anyone who doesn't belong, you'll let me or Sheriff Brody know, won't you? For your own protection." The threat was veiled but unmistakable. He wasn't asking. He was telling. He was marking his territory. "I can take care of myself, Mr. Corrigan," she said, her voice harder than she intended. His gaze lingered on her for a long moment, cold and calculating. "I'm sure you can," he said finally. He mounted his horse. "Just remember, some trouble is too big to handle alone." He tipped his hat and rode away, leaving Abigail trembling, not with fear, but with a cold, rising anger. She closed the door and turned to face the corner. The Modoc man emerged from the shadows. The stony mask was gone. In its place was a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. His eyes were fixed on the direction Corrigan had gone, burning with an intensity that startled her. For the first time, she saw something other than a patient or a threat. She saw a man with a purpose. Later that evening, as she sat sharpening a skinning knife, he finally spoke. His voice was low and raspy from disuse. "That man," he said. "Corrigan." Abigail looked up, surprised. "What about him?" He met her gaze, and the look in his eyes was a warning. "He is a man who walks a crooked path. He fills the earth with lies and bones." "He's a powerful man around here," she said cautiously. "Power built on graves is a house of dust," the man replied, his words laced with a strange, poetic gravity. "He is why I was in that hole. He and his dog. His dog, a man with eyes like a snake. The one who put the rope around my neck." He paused, his gaze dropping to the floor. "He is looking for something. Something he believes my people have." A cold dread trickled down Abigail's spine. Corrigan's visit wasn't a neighborly call. It was a search. He was hunting this man, and now she was hiding him. "You need to tell me who you are," she insisted, her voice quiet but firm. "I have a right to know the name of the man I'm risking my life for." He looked at her for a long time, a silent assessment. He seemed to weigh her, to look past her fear and see the iron resolve beneath. "My people call me Cale," he said at last, "and I was a chief of the Hot Creek band of the Modoc." The name settled in the small cabin, filling the space between them with a new, dangerous weight. Kyle, a chief. Abigail had not rescued a common fugitive. She had sheltered a leader of the very people the settlers had waged a bloody war against. The savages Corrigan had invoked were not some faceless horde. One of their leaders was sitting 3 feet away from her, his presence, both a judgment and a plea. "A chief," she repeated, the words feeling foreign on her tongue. "The war? It's over. Your leaders, Captain Jack, the others, they were hanged." "The war is never over when your home is stolen," Kyle said, his voice flat, devoid of self-pity. "And not all leaders stood at Captain Jack's side. Some of us argued for peace. It made us enemies of our own hot-blooded youth, and it earned us no trust from your soldiers. We were caught between two storms." He spoke slowly, deliberately, as if each English word was a carefully chosen stone. He told her of his band, the Hot Creek people, who had tried to remain neutral, to live quietly in the vast marshlands around Tool Lake. But neutrality was a luxury no Modoc was afforded. They were hunted by the army, betrayed by rival bands, jockeying for favor with the whites, and squeezed by encroaching settlers like Corrigan. A fragile, unspoken truce formed in the cabin. During the day, they were a study in silent cooperation. Kyle, his strength returning with astonishing speed, would help her with the chores he could do indoors. He had a natural, intuitive way with things. He rewrapped the loose handle of her axe with a strip of leather, making it stronger than before. He showed her a way to braid rope that doubled its strength. He moved with a quiet economy of motion that made her own bustling feel clumsy. In the evenings they would talk, or rather he would talk, and she would listen, her preconceived notions about the Modoc people crumbling with every word he spoke. He didn't speak of battles or raids, but of seasons, of watching the birds return to the lake, of the stories his grandfather told him about the creation of the world. He spoke of his wife and son, lost not to war, but to the coughing sickness that had swept through their camp the winter before. Abigail found herself sharing her own stories of loss, speaking of Robert in ways she hadn't with anyone else. She spoke of his dreams, his ambition, his tireless energy. "He wanted to build an empire of his own out here," she confessed one night, staring into the fire. "He said this land was for those bold enough to take it. He bought this plot from a prospector who went bust, said it was the cornerstone of our future." Kyle listened, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. "This land does not like to be taken," he said softly. "It prefers to be asked. Your husband, he did not ask." A flicker of defensiveness rose in Abigail. "He was a good man. He worked hard for everything we had." "Hard work is no virtue if the foundation is rotten," Kyle replied. It wasn't an accusation, but a statement of fact, as simple and unyielding as a stone. The words unsettled her, planting a seed of doubt she couldn't uproot. One afternoon, as a low-gray sky threatened snow, Kyle was examining Robert's rifle above the mantelpiece. He didn't touch it, but his eyes traced its lines, the polished stock, the brass fittings. "This is a fine rifle," he said. "A Sharps model 1874, a buffalo gun, a long-range weapon." "Robert was very proud of it," Abigail said. "He won it in a card game in Sacramento, or so he told me." Cal turned from the rifle to look at her. "He was killed, you said. How?" The question was direct, and it brought the memory rushing back with visceral clarity. "An ambush," she whispered, her hands automatically clenching in her lap. "Sheriff Brody said it was a Modoc raiding party. He and another man, a trapper named Dubois, were scouting a new pass through the mountains. They found Robert by the creek, an arrow in his back. His horse and his rifle were gone." "The rifle was gone?" Kyle asked, his gaze sharp. "But it is here." "Corrigan found it," Abigail explained. "He said one of his ranch hands bought it from a half-breed trader in Eureka a month later. He recognized it, and being a good neighbor, he returned it to me." She had always found the story a little too convenient, a little too neat. A man like Corrigan wasn't known for his selfless acts of kindness. Cale's eyes narrowed. "Corrigan?" The name was a curse on his lips. "He returns a rifle, but he wants the spring. He offers comfort, but his shadow is long." "You must be careful, Abigail Thorne. You see a grieving widow in the mirror. He sees only an obstacle." His warning was chilling, but it was his next words that truly terrified her. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "The man who put the rope on my neck, the man with the snake eyes, I have seen him before, a long time ago, in the shadow of the mountains near a creek." Abigail's blood ran cold. "What are you saying?" "He rode with another man, a big man with a loud voice and a sharp's rifle. Just like that one," Cale continued, his eyes burning with a dark fire. "They were not scouting a pass. They were meeting with one of my people. A man named Chayton, a man whose soul was for sale. They were looking for something, a map." He let the words hang in the air. Abigail felt as if the floor had dropped out from under her. A big man with a loud voice and a sharp's rifle. It was a perfect description of Robert. "No," she breathed, shaking her head. "Robert, he wouldn't. He was a rancher." "He was more than that," Kyle said, his voice laced with a grim certainty. "And his death was not the work of my people. The arrow in his back was not Modoc. Our fletching is made with goose feathers bound with sinew. The arrow the sheriff showed you, the one from your husband's body, I would wager it was fletched with turkey feathers, bound with plain thread. The kind a white man would use to make it look like our work." Abigail stared at him, her world tilting on its axis. The official story, the story that had defined her grief and her life for 2 years, was suddenly riddled with holes. Corrigan's timely return of the rifle, his insistent offers for her land, the convenient Modoc arrow. It all began to swirl into a sickening new pattern. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would anyone do that?" Cale looked at her, his eyes holding a deep, profound sorrow. Not for himself, but for her. He knew the answer, and he knew it would destroy her. "Because of the confession," he said. "The confession of the man who died. The reason they buried me alive was not to kill me, but to silence me. Because I am the last person alive who knows what really happened on the day your husband died." The confession did not come all at once. It was a story told in fragments over the next 2 days, pulled from Kyle like splinters of shrapnel from a deep wound. The telling of it seemed to pain him, not just for the memories it evoked, but for the damage he knew it was inflicting on Abigail. He was dismantling the very foundation of her identity. He began with the land, not her small plot, but the land beyond it. Deep in the mountains the settlers called the Devil's Backbone. To his people, it was known as the place of whispering spirits, a sacred area where for generations Modoc shamans had gone to seek visions. "It is not a place for greed," Cale explained, his voice low as they sat by the fire, the cabin sealed against a newly fallen snow. "The earth there is rich, not with the yellow metal your people crave, but with the white metal." "Silver?" Abigail stared at him. "There's no silver in these hills. Prospectors have searched for 50 years. They searched in the rivers, in the valleys," Kyle said. "They did not know where to look. The vein is hidden, high up in a cave behind a waterfall. It is a secret known only to the chiefs of my band. We do not touch it. It is part of the spirit of the land. To take it is to bleed the mountain." But someone had learned the secret. A Modoc man named Chayton, which meant falcon, a man whose spirit had been broken by the war. He had seen his family starve and had grown bitter, believing the old ways were foolish and that the white man's wealth was the only power that mattered. "Chayton decided to sell our soul," Cal said with quiet contempt. "He made a deal. He would lead 2 white men to the cave. In exchange, he wanted gold, enough to take him far away from here, to live like a king." "2 white men," Abigail repeated, her voice wooden. "Yes," Cale confirmed, his eyes meeting hers, full of a grim pity. "The loud one with the sharp's rifle, your husband, Robert Thorne, and the quiet one who planned it all, the one who owned the valley, Bartholomew Corrigan." Abigail felt a wave of nausea. Robert and Corrigan. It seemed impossible. They had been neighbors, nothing more. Corrigan had offered his condolences, called Robert a pillar of the community. But as Cale spoke, 100 small, forgotten details clicked into place. Robert's sudden, unexplained trips to buy cattle, the hushed, late-night arguments she'd overheard, the extra money he sometimes had, which he'd explained away with a lucky hand at cards. They were partners, Cale continued. Corrigan had the power and the connections to bring the silver out and sell it. Your husband had the boldness and, they thought, the trust of his neighbors. Chayton was their key. He drew them a map on a piece of cured deerskin. Kyle and his own warriors had been watching. They knew Chayton was a traitor, and they suspected he was meeting with white men. They tracked them to the rendezvous point by the creek, the same creek where Robert's body was later found. "We did not go there to kill," Kale insisted. "We went to stop them, to take the map and drive them from our sacred land." We confronted them. Chayton, your husband, and a third man. Corrigan's man, the one with the snake eyes. Cole Harding, Abigail breathed. She knew the name. Harding was Corrigan's foreman, a quiet, brutal man who was feared throughout the territory. Corrigan himself was not there, Kyle said. He is not a man who gets his own hands dirty. He sent Harding to oversee the deal, but something went wrong. Your husband, he was not just a partner. He was a cheat. This was the part that struck Abigail the hardest. He had made a copy of the map, Kyle revealed. We heard them arguing. Harding accused him of it. Your husband planned to double-cross Corrigan to register the claim for himself and cut Corrigan out. He pulled a pistol. Chayton, the coward, tried to run. Harding shot him in the back. The scene played out in Abigail's mind like a hellish vision. The argument, the greed, the betrayal. My warriors and I emerged from the trees, Cale went on. Harding saw us and opened fire. Robert Thorne turned and fired at us as well. A battle erupted. It was chaos. In the confusion, Harding saw his chance. While your husband was fighting my men, Harding stabbed him in the back with a knife, then fled into the woods. Abigail was shaking, her hands pressed to her mouth. No. They said it was an arrow. A lie, Cale said firmly. Harding killed your husband to silence him and to take back the original map. He must have failed to find the copy. After he was gone, my men and we vanished. We knew what would happen. We would be blamed. And we were. Corrigan and Harding returned later with the sheriff. They pulled the knife from your husband's back and put one of their own arrows in the wound. They created a story, a Modoc massacre. The room was silent, save for the crackling of the fire. Abigail felt hollowed out, as if her entire past had been a lie. The man she had loved and mourned was not a victim. He was a thief, a cheat, and a conspirator, killed by his own partner in crime. Her grief, the defining emotion of the last 2 years, felt like a fool's burden. "And you?" she finally asked, her voice a raw whisper. "How did they find you?" "I was a ghost for 2 years, Cale said. I led what was left of my people, hiding in the mountains. But Harding never stopped looking for me. Not because of the murder. He knew who did that. He was looking for me because of the other map, the copy Robert made. He and Corrigan must believe that Robert passed it to me during the fight, or that I took it from his body." "Did you?" Kyle shook his head. "No, I never saw it. But 2 weeks ago, they found our hidden camp. They came at night. It was not a fight. It was a slaughter. They captured me. Harding, he questioned me. He wanted to know where the map was. When I told him I didn't have it, he didn't believe me. He beat me. Then Corrigan gave the order. They were not to hang me. A hanging leaves a body to be found. They were to bury me, to make me disappear forever. They left me in that hole, believing the earth would finish their job." He looked at her, his dark eyes filled with the terrible weight of the truth he had just delivered. "I have taken the memory of your husband from you, Abigail Thorne," he said quietly. "I am sorry for your pain, but you saved my life. You had a right to know the truth of the man you married, and the men who truly killed him." Abigail didn't cry. The pain was too deep for tears. It was a cold, hard knot in her chest. She looked at the Sharps rifle over the fireplace, the symbol of her husband's ambition. It was not a trophy. It was a piece of evidence in a sordid crime. She looked at Cale, the man she had feared, and saw not an enemy, but the only other survivor of that terrible day. And she looked inward at the woman who had been defined by a lie. That woman was gone. In her place, a new one was being forged in the cold, unforgiving fire of truth. An angry woman. A woman who now had a reason to fight. The 2 days following the confession were a time of profound and unnerving change within the small cabin. The air, once thick with unspoken questions and cautious distance, was now charged with a shared, dangerous knowledge. Abigail felt as though she was seeing the world through a new set of eyes. The familiar landscape around her ranch, the gentle slope of the pasture, the dark line of the woods, the majestic peaks in the distance, was no longer a backdrop for her grief, but a crime scene. Her image of Robert had been shattered into 1,000 pieces. At night, she lay awake, replaying every memory, every conversation, scrutinizing them under the harsh light of Cale's revelation. The pieces reassembled themselves into a portrait of a stranger, a man restless, secretive, driven by an ambition so rapacious it had led him into a fatal pact with a man like Corrigan. The love she had felt for him was now tangled with a bitter sense of betrayal. She wasn't just grieving a death anymore. She was mourning a life that had been a lie. Her fear of Cale had evaporated, replaced by a complex mix of gratitude, pity, and a startling sense of kinship. They were two solitary figures bound together by the violence of other men. He was no longer just a Modoc Chief. He was a witness, a victim, a partner in a truth that could get them both killed. The proof of their shared danger came swiftly. Cole Harding, Corrigan's snake-eyed foreman, began to make his presence known. He didn't ride up to the cabin like Corrigan had. Instead, he was a fleeting shadow at the edge of the woods, a silhouette on a distant ridge at dusk. He was watching. Abigail would catch glimpses of him when she went to the well or tended her chickens. He never approached, never called out. He just watched, a silent, predatory warning. "He knows," Cale said one morning, watching from the window as Harding paused his horse on a rise a half-mile away. "He knows I am not dead. Someone must have seen your tracks that day. Or he simply knows that hole was disturbed. Now he watches. He waits. He wonders if I am here." "What does he want?" Abigail asked, though she already knew the answer. "The map," Cal replied. "Corrigan's greed is a fire that will not die until it has consumed everything. As long as that second map exists, it is a threat to him. Anyone could find it and lay claim to his secret silver. He needs it, and he believes I know where it is." Abigail's mind was racing. "But you don't." "No. And Robert Thorne is dead. So where could it be?" Cal mused, his gaze drifting around the cabin. His eyes settled on her. "He wouldn't have carried it on him during the fight. Too risky. He would have hidden it somewhere safe. Somewhere he planned to retrieve it after he had dealt with Harding." A jolt went through Abigail. "Somewhere safe," she whispered. Robert had trusted no one, but he had trusted his own property. He had trusted his home. The map had to be here, somewhere in the cabin or on the ranch. "We have to find it," Abigail said, a new hard resolve in her voice. "It's the only proof we have. Without it, it's your word, the word of a Modoc against Bartholomew Corrigan's. No one will believe us. And if we find it," Kyle challenged gently, "what then? Do you take it to your sheriff, Brody? A man who eats at Corrigan's table? It would be signing your own death warrant." "Then we use it," Abigail countered, her mind working furiously. "We use it as a weapon. We expose him." The idea was terrifying, reckless, but it was the only path she could see that wasn't passive surrender. She would not let Corrigan take her land and get away with murdering her husband, no matter what kind of man he had been. And so a desperate alliance was forged. They became treasure hunters in their own home, searching for the last testament of a dead man's treachery. Their search was quiet, methodical, conducted in the precious hours between sunrise and the inevitable appearance of Harding on the horizon. They started in the cabin. They checked under the loose floorboard where Robert had kept a small stash of emergency cash. Nothing. They sifted through the meager collection of books he owned. They emptied out his old trunk filled with worn clothes and personal effects, each item a painful reminder of her late husband's lies. Abigail found a silver locket she had given him. Opening it felt like a violation. Cal possessed a patience and an eye for detail that Abigail lacked. He saw things she overlooked. He noticed that one of the stones in the hearth was a slightly different color than the others. With a crowbar, they pried it loose. Behind it, there was only a dusty hollow filled with spiderwebs. Their frustration grew with each passing day. Harding's presence became bolder. He began riding closer, circling the property just beyond her fence line, his message clear. "I know you're in there. I'm not leaving." The pressure was immense. The cabin felt smaller, the walls closing in. The alliance between Abigail and Cale deepened, forged in the crucible of their shared confinement and goal. They learned to communicate with glances, with small gestures. She would watch him mend a piece of tack, his long fingers surprisingly deft, and feel a sense of stability she hadn't felt in years. He would watch her pore over an old ledger, her brow furrowed in concentration, and see the steel that lay beneath her quiet exterior. One evening, after another fruitless day of searching, Abigail slumped onto a chair in exhaustion. "It's no use," she said, defeated. "He was clever. He could have hidden it anywhere, buried it outside, thrown it down the well." Cale was standing by the door, looking out the small peephole Robert had drilled. "Think like he did," Cale said softly. "He was a man who loved his possessions. He was proud of them. He wouldn't have buried it in the mud. He would have hidden it in something that was his, something he valued." Abigail's eyes scanned the room, the sturdy furniture he had built, the tools on the wall, and then her gaze fell upon the tack hanging by the door, specifically Robert's saddle. It wasn't the one he used every day. It was his prized possession, a handsome, silver-inlaid parade saddle he had bought after a supposedly successful cattle sale. He rarely used it, deeming it too fine for the rugged country, but he spent hours cleaning and oiling it. He was intensely proud of it. "His saddle," she whispered. Kyle turned, his eyes following hers. She walked over to it, her heart beginning to pound. She ran her hands over the tooled leather, feeling for any abnormality. It seemed perfect, solid, but Kyle, standing beside her, pointed to the cantle, the raised back of the saddle. He ran his fingers along the seam where the leather was stitched together. "This stitching," he said, "it is different from the rest. Thicker thread. The holes are not as clean." Taking her skinning knife, Abigail carefully, painstakingly, began to cut the threads. Her hands trembled. This felt like the final desecration of Robert's memory, a final, intimate betrayal. The leather parted. Inside, nestled within the horsehair padding, was a small, flat object wrapped in oilcloth. With shaking fingers, she pulled it out and unwrapped it. It was a piece of soft, supple deerskin, and drawn upon it in crude ink was a map. It showed the creeks, the ridges, and the waterfalls of the Devil's Backbone. And marked with a simple X was a location high in the mountains labeled simply, "The Vein." They had found it. The proof, the prize, the death warrant. At that exact moment, from outside came the sound they had been dreading. Not the soft tread of a single horse, but the thunder of many. A harsh voice cut through the night. "Abigail Thorne, this is Sheriff Brody. We have a warrant to search your property. We have reason to believe you are harboring a fugitive and murderer. Come out with your hands in the air." Through the window they could see them. Sheriff Brody, looking uncomfortable and out of his depth. And behind him, silhouetted by a dozen torches, were Bartholomew Corrigan, Cole Harding, and a posse of at least 10 armed ranch hands. They had the cabin surrounded. The trap had been sprung. The demand from Sheriff Brody hung in the cold night air, an official decree that signaled the end of their desperate secrecy. Abigail stood frozen in the center of the cabin, the deerskin map clutched in her hand. Its edges felt as sharp as a razor. It was the truth, but in this moment, it felt like a death sentence. "They timed it perfectly," Cale said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. He moved away from the window, melting into the shadows of the cabin. "They let us find it for them." The plan became chillingly clear. Corrigan hadn't just been waiting, he'd been patient. He let them do the work, turning Abigail's own home into the crucible where his prize would be revealed. Now he was here to collect, with the law as his shield. "Abigail!" Brody's voice boomed again, laced with an impatient tremor. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be. We know he's in there." "Stall them," Cale whispered from the darkness. His eyes were accustomed to the dim light, and he was already scanning the cabin's layout, thinking not as a patient, but as a warrior. "They need a reason to come in. Don't give it to them." Taking a shaky breath, Abigail moved to the door. "Sheriff Brody, what is the meaning of this? I am a lone woman here. You're frightening me." Her voice was higher than usual, and she hoped it sounded like genuine fear and not the terror-fueled rage that was actually coursing through her. "Just open the door, Mrs. Thorne," came Corrigan's smooth, commanding voice, overriding the sheriff's. "We have a witness. Old man Hemlock's boy saw you helping an injured Modoc in the woods weeks ago. Said he saw smoke from your chimney every day since. You've been hiding him, hiding the man who murdered Chayton." A lie built upon a lie. They were twisting the narrative to make her an accomplice, a traitor to her own kind. "That's a ridiculous accusation," Abigail shouted back, her mind racing. She needed to hide the map, but where? They would tear the cabin apart. Kyle gestured silently toward the fireplace. The fire was burning low, a bed of hot coals glowing in the hearth. It was a terrible risk, destroying their only proof, but it was better than handing it to Corrigan. Abigail shook her head. No, there had to be another way. Her eyes darted around the room and landed on her sewing basket. It was a simple wicker basket filled with spools of thread, needles, and scraps of fabric. An utterly feminine, domestic object. An object they would likely overlook in their violent search for a man's secret. While Kyle watched the windows, she moved quickly. She folded the map into a small, tight square and shoved it deep into the center of a large spool of dark brown thread, the kind she used for mending horse blankets. It was a desperate, flimsy hiding place, but it was the best she could do. She placed the spool back in the basket, covering it with scraps of calico. "Last chance, Abigail," Corrigan yelled. "We're coming in." The heavy thud of a boot against the door echoed through the cabin. Then another. They were trying to break it down. Kyle moved to her side. "When they break it, stay down," he ordered, his voice calm and lethal. In his hand was the heavy iron poker from the hearth. It wasn't a rifle, but in his grasp it looked deadly. "They want me alive to question me. They will be less careful with you." The doorframe splintered. With a final crashing blow, the door flew open, torn from its hinges. Sheriff Brody stumbled in first, his pistol drawn but held uncertainly. Behind him, Cole Harding shoved past, his eyes, just as Cale had described, like a snake's, cold and unblinking, fixed on the shadows. Corrigan followed, his face a mask of triumphant authority, the torchlight making his handsome features seem demonic. "Well, well," Corrigan said, his eyes sweeping the room and landing on Abigail, who stood defiantly by the hearth. "It seems the grieving widow has been keeping secrets." Harding's gaze darted around the room, finally locking onto the dark corner where Kel had stood, but he was gone. Before anyone could react, a shape dropped from the rafters above. Kyle landed with a silent thud directly behind two of Corrigan's ranch hands. He moved with blinding speed. The fire poker swung in a silent arc, cracking against the wrist of one man, sending his rifle clattering to the floor. The other man grunted as Cal drove his shoulder into his chest, sending him crashing backward into the men trying to crowd through the doorway. It was a moment of pure, shocking chaos. "Get him!" Harding roared, raising his own pistol. Abigail reacted on pure instinct. She grabbed the heavy cast-iron skillet from its hook by the fire and hurled it with all her might. It flew through the air and struck Harding square in the arm, causing his shot to go wide, blasting a hole in the ceiling. He cursed, his arm dropping to his side. The diversion gave Cale the second he needed. He vaulted over the overturned table, kicked open the small shuttered window on the back wall, a window no one had thought to cover, and disappeared into the snowy darkness. "After him!" Corrigan bellowed, his composure finally breaking. "Don't let him get away!" Several of the ranch hands scrambled out the broken door, fanning out into the night, their torches bobbing frantically. Harding, cradling his injured arm, glared at Abigail with pure venom before following them. Within moments, the cabin was empty, except for Abigail, Sheriff Brody, and Bartholomew Corrigan. Corrigan walked slowly toward her, his face a thundercloud of fury. He saw the disturbed hearthstone, the open trunk, the saddle with its cut seam. "So," he hissed, his voice dangerously low, "you found it. Where is it, Abigail? Where is the map?" "I don't know what you're talking about," Abigail said, her voice shaking but steady. She stood her ground, the sewing basket just a few feet away on a small table. Corrigan laughed, a short, ugly sound. "Don't play the fool with me. I have underestimated you. That was a mistake I will not make again. You found it. Give it to me now and I might persuade the sheriff to be lenient with you. Harboring a fugitive, assaulting an officer of my posse, those are serious crimes. Sheriff Brody shifted uncomfortably. Now, Bart, let's just— Be quiet, Brody, Corrigan snapped without looking at him. His eyes were locked on Abigail. The map. Now. He took a step closer, his hand raised as if to strike her. Suddenly, a voice cut through the tension from the broken doorway. I wouldn't do that if I were you, Mr. Corrigan. They all turned. A man stood there silhouetted against the night. He was not one of Corrigan's men. He was older, with a weathered face and a tired, intelligent gaze. And he was holding a shotgun leveled squarely at Corrigan's chest. Behind him stood two more men, looking equally grim and determined. They were small ranchers from the other side of the valley, men who had long been suspicious of Corrigan's relentless expansion. What is the meaning of this, Peterson? Corrigan snarled. I got a visit from a friend tonight, Bart, the man named Peterson said, his voice calm. A Modoc Chief. Told me a wild story about a map, a murder, and a woman in trouble. Told me you'd be here, using the law as your own private army. Looks like he was telling the truth. The sound of more approaching horses filled the air. Not Corrigan's men, but other ranchers, drawn by the word Cale had spread on his flight through the darkness. He hadn't just run. He had gone for help, not from the law, but from the community of independent men who feared and hated Corrigan as much as he did. The standoff was no longer two people in a cabin. It was a full-blown confrontation, right here on Abigail's desecrated doorstep. Corrigan was no longer the accuser. He was the accused, and the jury was armed. The arrival of Peterson and the other armed ranchers shattered Bartholomew Corrigan's authority. His posse of hired men hesitated, their loyalty dissolving in the face of armed neighbors. They were paid to bully and intimidate, not to die for a tyrant so thoroughly cornered. Arrest them, Brody! Corrigan snarled, his voice cracking with desperation. But the sheriff, seeing the hard, determined faces of the men he had to live amongst, simply let his pistol lower. The spell was broken. Seizing the moment, Abigail strode to her sewing basket. With steady hands, she retrieved the spool of thread. She didn't rush. She unwound it slowly, deliberately, her eyes locked on Corrigan's. The deerskin map fell onto the table. Looking for this, Mr. Corrigan? She asked, her voice ringing with cold power. Proof of your partnership with my husband. Proof of your greed, and the real reason Robert Thorne was murdered. The confession hung in the air, undeniable. Cole Harding, seeing his world collapse, made a desperate last move. He lunged for the map, but a swift, brutal blow from the butt of Peterson's shotgun sent him sprawling to the floor, unconscious. With his enforcer down and his allies melting away into the night, Corrigan stood defeated, his empire of fear reduced to a single damaged cabin. Spurred to action by the dozen armed witnesses, Sheriff Brody finally found his courage and placed both Corrigan and Harding under arrest. In the quiet hours before dawn, after the last of the ranchers had left, Kyle appeared from the edge of the woods. He looked not at the broken door, but at Abigail. You have your justice, he said, his voice low. And you have your truth, Abigail replied, meeting his gaze. A profound, unspoken understanding passed between them. They were survivors of the same fire, marked by the same flames. I cannot stay, Cal stated, not with sadness, but with purpose. My people, what is left of them? They are scattered. I must find them. He gave her a single respectful nod. Live well, Abigail Thorne. You have the strength of the mountains. He turned and without another word, vanished back into the wilderness that was his home. Abigail stood on her porch, watching the sunrise cast its first light on her broken door. Her past was a ruin, a life built on a lie. But her future, for the first time in 2 long years, was entirely her own. She was no longer a grieving widow, but a woman who had faced the truth and emerged from the fire, strong enough to meet any dawn alone. The story of Abigail Thorne and Chief Cale is a powerful reminder that the deepest truths are often buried, and it takes immense courage to dig them up. It's a tale of how one act of compassion can unravel a web of lies, and how an alliance born in desperation can forge a justice that the law itself failed to deliver. Their lives were changed forever, not by the violence that surrounded them, but by the choice to trust one another in a world determined to tear them apart. They prove that true strength isn't just about surviving the wilderness, but about navigating the treacherous landscape of the human heart. If this story of courage, betrayal, and the unlikely bond that brought down a tyrant moved you, please help us share it. Hit that like button to let us know you want more tales like this. Share this video with someone who appreciates a story with real heart and grit. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel and ring that notification bell. We have so many more stories from the forgotten corners of history to share with you. Thank you for listening.